Okay. Working. Oh, my blot went missing. 1 second. Okay. Try this one more time.
Starting.
Waiting for it to start.
Oh, Tazai. Okay, now we're where we need to be.
Yeah, but I don't see the full daf.
What are you seeing?
I just see the first line.
First paragraph.
Is it getting better or worse?
It's not moving.
Oh, 1 second. Because my internet's very slow, I think. 1 second.
Ikadam Miravam Baravuna Goofy Stoy, and that's it.
Let me see if I can fix that. Fix that. So I have too many screens open. So 1 second. Yeah, no, I was sharing the wrong screen. That's what was going on. Now I'm going to share this again. It should be much better now. Second. And okay, now we'll share this properly.
Okay.
Hoping now it will work better. Now does it move up and down?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay, perfect. So we are up to the Mishnah. Yayin Nesach, Osir. Yayin Nesach is Osir. The Oyser B'chol, and it asers a kolshu, which means if it's min b'minoi, if yayin nesach drops in to a big container of yayin, it asers everything. It's aser v'oser b'kolshu. Yayin b'yayin, so that's min b'minoi, or mayim b'mayim. And Rashi says if you had mayim that was served up to an avodah zara, so the mayim is aser b'anoah because of the krubas avodah zara, that has the same halacha. It's oser b'kolshu. However, min b'she'enoi minoi, yayin b'mayin or mayin b'yayin, that's benoish and tam. So that's one typically 1 to 60. Zaklal. This rule applies in other cases as well. Min b'minoi is b'mashahu, and min b'she'enoi minoi b'shalei b'minoi is benoish and tam. Gewaltig. Let's see the Heilige Gemara. Yosy Rav Dimi. When Rav Dimi came, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to have a whole slew of different Mandamrim saying things in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and there was like a 5-way machlokes what Rabbi Yochanan said. So Rav Dimi is the most kuladik ashita of the bunch, and he says as follows: Hama'ara yayin nesech michavos lebo. You have a bar full of kosher wine, and you have a jug of yayin nesech, and you're pouring the yayin nesech into the bar. You're pouring it slowly. It's a small stream. You don't dump the whole thing in. You pour it slowly. Afilu kol hayoim kuloi. Even if you're consistently adding more and more and more and more, rishain bottle. As every drop of wine of yayin nesach enters the bar, it's bottle. So once it's bottle, it's like kosher wine. So you could technically add many times the amount of the contents of the bar. And it's all yayin kosher, because as each little bit of wine enters the kosher bar, it becomes bottle, it becomes like kosher wine. So that's a very big kula. And this is how Rashi understands it. Tosfos argues. Tosfos only says up until it's no longer bottle b'shisha. But Rashi says it's unlimited. So Frank the Gemara, our Mishnah seems to say exactly the opposite. Because our Mishnah says, Nan yayin nesach aser. That means even if you pour a drop of yayin nesach into a bar, not like Rav Dimi says that it's bottle, rather it'll answer the whole bar b'kosher.
Isn't it min b'minoi?
It is min b'minoi. And Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, even min b'minoi, kama bottle. Even that would become a bottle, which is shver from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says min b'minoi ashes b'mashu. So how does that correspond with Rabbi Yochanan, with Rabbi Dimi and Rabbi Yochanan? So Zok to Gemara, my love, what's the pshat, the pshat of the Mishnah? The kanafel yisura l'gavatera. If you exactly the case of Rabbi Dimi, you're pouring a little bit of wine from a jug into the bar, and even the mashu will last for the whole bar. So you see, our Mishnah says not like Rabbi Dimi. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Dimi has a different pshat in the Mishnah. Loi, the kanafel hetera l'gavi yisura. You know what the Mishnah is talking about? Where I have a bar full of yayin nesach, and I now pour kosher wine into it. Every little bit of kosher wine becomes osir. That's what the Mishnah is referring to. Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara weiter. Toshma. Let's look at the second half of our Mishnah. Yayin b'mayim. Wine spilled into water. Again, it's benois and tam. Frank the Gemara, the same thing. My lav de kanofil chamra di isura l'mayid de tera. Yayin nesach is being poured in to regular water, and it's still asus benois and tam. And you don't say kama bottle. Zok Gemara loy. That's not how Rav Dimi will learn Pshat in the Mishnah. He's going to learn the kanofil chamra de hetera l'mayid di isura. The water in the pit was osir, and the wine that fell in was heter. Correct the Gemara, umi the reisha b'maya de isura. If the reisha is speaking, where the water is osir and there's wine that's kosher falling in to the water that's osir, seifa nami b'maya de isura. The seifa should also be speaking in a parallel case, in the consistent case, where the mayim was osir. And what does the seifa say? The Katani Seifa Mayim b'yayin. If Mayim of Isser fell into Yayin of Heter, b'nois and dam. According to Rav Dimi, it should be kama bottle. Omalach Rav Dimi kula masnisin etera legavi surah. All of the cases in the Mishnah are consistent because they're all speaking where the Isser was in the barrel or in the bar, and the Heter fell into it. The first case is where wine of heter fell into water of iser, and seifa the kanafel mayadatera lechamer de isura, and we say that kama bottle. So what is the chiddush? What is the chiddush that it's bottle? It's roiv iser. Of course, the heter will be bottle. So Rashi speaks out. Vashmi'inon, the chiddush is the cholkama. The Yahava Maya Taima B'Chamra. as long as we could still tell from the wine that it has water in it, itzar, it will be usher because the water was iser. Ad sheyivatel tam hayayin as tam hamayim. Until there's enough wine that the taste of wine will be bevatel the tam hamayim, and that would only happen if it's nafel kula kachado, where a whole bunch of iser fell in at once, and therefore the maya di surah wouldn't be able to be bevatel. Kabalt. Zog the Gemara Vayter. So now we have a huge chiddush of Rav Dimi, and he says when Isser falls into Heter, if it's a little bit at a time, the Isser, as soon as it joins the Heter, becomes like Heter. And Kum Dechosh, you'll be able to pour in tons and tons of Isser, as long as it's coming in a little bit at a time, it becomes bottle and it joins the ranks of Heter, and it will be able to be Mevatel, more Isser coming in. That is the chiddush of Rav Dimi or Rabbi Yochanan. But now we're going to bring, quote, people who argue. Zog the Gemara ki also Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So now Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef said over a different halach in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, which clearly contradicts what Rav Dimi said in Rabbi Yochanan's name. And he said, Hama'ar yayin nesech mitzircher katan lebar. If you're pouring yayin nesech from a little jug that has a tiny stream that comes out of it, there afilu kolayan kulai rishon bottle. There you'll say that each bit is bottle. But v'dafka tzircher katan delenovish amude. Its stream is really tiny, like a syringe, like a needle. Aval chavis, but in the case of Rav Dimi, where you're pouring from a chavis where there's a much thicker stream than just that of a needle, the novish amude, its stream is much thicker. Loi, we don't say kama bo. So here we see Rabbi Yitzchak clearly arguing on Rav Dimi, and now we're going to bring Ravin who argues on Rav Dimi. He also Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When Ravin came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Yayin Nesach shenofal labor. Yayin Nesach that fell into a bar. V'nofal shom kitain shalmayim. So you have a bar full of kosher wine, and you have Yayin Nesach that fell into the kosher wine. So there's, let's say, a little bit of Yayin Nesach into a big bar of kosher wine. V'noval shom kitain shalmayim. And then a whole bunch of water fell in. There's enough water to be mevatel just the Yayin shalisser. But there's not enough water to mevatel all the Yayin. So let's say, for instance, there were 60 gallons of Yayin in the bar, kosher wine, and a couple of ounces of Yayin of Isser fell in. That's going to be Osir. But after that, 60 gallons of water fell in. So the 60 gallons of water will be able to be mevatel just a little bit of Yayin Nesach by itself. But now that the whole thing is joined together, there's not enough water to be mevatel all of that wine. So what do? Royin es heter ki ilu eina. You look as if there's no heter at all, and you look as if there's only Yayin Nesach in that bar with the water. V'ashar mayim rabim alav umevatel noisa. Now, from these words of Ravin, you clearly see that you don't say kama bottle. Because if you said kama bottle, then there's no Isser anymore. The Isser is totally absorbed into Heter, and now you wouldn't be able to say Roy, and you look at the Heter like it's not here. Because the kama was bottle already. So you clearly see that Ravin Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rav Dimi as well. So Rashi says, since Rav Dimi is a Yochid, and both Ravin and Rabbi Yitzchak argue on him, we paskin l'chumra, and we don't paskin like Rav Dimi. Toshva says, I agree with Rashi that we don't paskin like Rav Dimi, but not because two people argue on it, but rather because this is all a case of stam yayin, and stam yayin is only also midrabanan, and whenever you have a shayla of an isur d'Rabbanan, you go l'kum. Okay, now we're going to bring more shittas that further complicate the situation. Zog to Gemara Vayta. He also Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda came, he also said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan to clarify what we just heard from Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan said that even though you have wine of Isser and wine of Heter mixed together, you separate the wine of Esser from the wine of Heter, figuratively, And if there's enough water to be mevatel, the wine of Isser, it will be mutter. And the water doesn't have to be mevatel all the wine, just the wine of Isser. So when Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this halacha that Rabban said is lo shanu el shenafal kita in shalmayim tchila. That's only if the water fell into the kosher wine before the yayin nesach fell in. So when the yayin nesach fell in, right away it was confronted with the water that was not bottled to the wine in the bar. But at first the wine fell in, the yayin nesach fell into the bar of wine, then they become inseparable, and we say matzah minas minoi, the wines joined together in one force, v'neyar, and therefore even if mayim fell in later, it wouldn't help. That was what Rabbi Shmuel Yehuda Amar Rebbe said. Zog the Gemara, but the Ika de Masnila Masnisa. There are those who learn that the clarification that Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan was not clarifying what Rabban said, it was going directly a comment on our Mishnah, as follows. It says in our Mishnah, Yayin b'yayin is kosher. If wine falls into wine, it will answer the wine even with a kosher. And Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda said in the name of Yochanan, if wine falls into wine, it's asher b'mashu. But that's if no water got mixed in. If water falls in, after the wine falls in, then the water will be mevatel the wine of Isser. Roin is a heter ki ilu einoi. You look at the heter wine that's as if it's not there. Bashar mayim robin alav mevatel. And the yain of Isser alone, he gets mevutel by the water. Freit the Gemara ma'ika bein the masnila masnisen bein the masnila adarafin. What's the difference, halacha? The Gemara very simple. Ma the masnila masnisen laboy tchila. If you are goyers that Shmuel Bar Yehuda Rabbi Yochanan was going on the Mishnah, then even if the water falls into this bar after the yayin nesach got mixed in, you would still say roin, and the water would still be mevatel the yayin nesach. But uman the matla the Rabbin. But if you learned that this clarification was on Rabbin, then boy tchila. Only if first the water fell into the bar, and only afterwards did the yayin nesach fall into the bar, then you'll say the water will be mevatel the yayin nesach. But if first the yayin nesach fell into the bar, and then the water fell into the bar, it would not be mevatel. Itmar, we had a machlokes. Yayin nesach shenafal lebar. Yayin nesach fell into a bar. So you had a bar of kosher wine, and some yayin nesach fell into it, which is the same case that we've been discussing for the last while. And then v'nafal sham kita and shamayim, and water fell in as well. Now it sounds from these words like first the wine fell in, and then the water fell in. And Toys tells us, but we're going to soon see on Amud Beis that not necessarily was it in that order. So you have a bar of wine, water fell into it, and yayin nesach fell into it. What is the status? So let's turn on to Amud Beis, Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. Omar Chizkiah said, it depends on what the last item that fell into this bar was. Higdila be'isser, if the last thing that fell in was wine, the yayin nesach. So first water fell into the bar of yayin kosher, then yayin nesach fell into that, then it will be usher. Why will it be usher? Rashi explains, Higdila yamayim ba'yayin be'isser shenafal yayin nesach l'soif. If after the water fell into the bar, only then did the yayin nesach fall in, the igdiloi, and the yayin nesach ultimately made the volume of the wine-water mixture even more, because wine fell in now, usher it will be usher. You don't look at it as if there is no heter of wine, there's only the yayin nesach and the water. The yayin nesach is going to become part of the kosher wine, and once they're one unit, be'ein hamayim robin alav. Now, the kosher kain in naflu mayim b'soif. Madach, if the water fell in first, it won't be mevatel the yayin nesach that fell in later. Kosher kain, if the yayin nesach fell in and then the water fell in. But higdila beheter mutter. When is it mutter? That's only if the yayin of heter fell in. So first the yayin nesach fell into the bar, then water fell in. Now the water and the yayin nesach are there together, and the water is mevatel the yayin nesach. If after that a whole bunch more yayin falls in, we say that once the yayin nesach is bottled in the water, it remains bottled. It doesn't wake up once it can connect with the rest of the wine. That was what Chizkiah said. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Afilu hagdilo be'isur mutter." Even if the wine came in last, it will still be mutter. You'll still say Ryan, and you'll still say the water will be able to be mevatel the yayin nesach, even though the yayin nesach came out. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah told Rabbi Zera, "Leima Chizkiah v'Rabbi Yochanan beplukta de Rabbi Lezer v'Rabbanan committed." I'm going to suggest that the machlokes between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, where depending on what went in last, that's what's going to aser. Let's say that's totally in a machlokes that we're familiar with, that we learned already, a machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and the Rabban. The Tanan we learned. Imagine you have a dough, and the dough requires 4 ounces of yeast for it to rise. And you had 2 ounces of chulin and 2 ounces of truma for a grand total of 4 ounces. You mix that yeast into the dough, and the dough rose. Does this dough have a din of truma, and the Yisrael may not eat it, or does it have a din of chulin? So, Zok the Mishnah, Sa'ar shel chulin v'shel truma shenaflu l'soicha isa. They fell into an isa. The 2 ounces of truma yeast could not have made the dough rise. Neither could the 2 ounces of chulin yeast have made the dough rise. But together there's 4 ounces, and that's why the dough was able to rise. So does this dough have a status of truma, or does this dough have a status of chulin? Zok Rabbi Lezer, whatever fell in last. Rabbi Lezer achar acharoin aniba. If the chulin fell in last, then it's chulin. If the truma fell in last, then it's truma. That's similar to Chizkiah, because Chizkiah said, if the yayin nesach fell in last, it will be aser, and if the yayin toy fell in last, it will be mutter. So that's where Rabbi Yirmiyah saw a similarity between Chizkiah and Rabbi Lezer. The Chachamim Oimrim, it doesn't matter what fell in last. Bein shenafal iser b'tchila, ubein b'soif, einay aser, it will never aser at yeheboy kedei lahachmitz. The truma will not make the dough into truma unless it, independent of any other yeast, made it chametz. And that didn't happen. So it'll be mutter. So Zok Rabbi Yirmiyah, let's say that Rabbi Lezer holds, you look at the last thing that fell in, holds like Chizkiah. And Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that you don't go bust on the last thing, will hold like the Rabbon. Zok to Gemara b'Tizbra, I don't think, Rabbi Yirmiyah, you have good pshat in the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan, because you need to look into how Abaye qualified and explained the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Because via Amar Abaye told us how to understand what Rabbi Eliezer said. And he told us as follows. Loi shanu, that Rabbi Eliezer said, the only thing that counts is the last yeast that was put in, that's Elisha Kadam Vesilik as a Isser. So if the chulin was put in last, Rabbi Eliezer says the dough was chulin, that's only if you already took out the yeast that was truma. So you put in the yeast that was truma, it started creating a chemical reaction, but it wasn't enough to make it chametz. Then you took it out, and then you added chulin. So when the dough became chulin, there was no truma there at all. When the dough started to rise, there was no chulin there at all. That's where Rabbi Eliezer says that the dough is chulin. But if you let the truma in there, aser, it will be aser. So in our case, the wine, both wines were left there. No one pulled out any wine. So according to Abaye's understanding, even Rabbi Eliezer would hold you don't go basar the last thing, because Rabbi Eliezer says you only go to the last thing if it was silikas iser. So clearly, Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon is not the machlokes of Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. Elamai, Chizkiah the Amar Kama. Who does Chizkiah hold like? He doesn't fit in like Rabbi Eliezer. And he surely doesn't fit in with the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan said that if it can't answer by itself, it's going to be completely mutter. Ella Hacha, the Machlokes Chizkiah and the Rabbanan is a completely separate Machlokes, and it's B'roin Kamivali. We were introduced to the concept of Roin and Amar Aleph. Do you make believe like the heter is not there, and it's only the Isser and the water? V'roin kemivli lechizkia less leiroin. According to Chizkia, you don't say roin. If the yayin fell in last, if the yayin fell in after the water, so what happens is you don't say roin, and therefore you say the two wines join forces, and therefore they aser the water can't be materit because you don't say roin. And Rabbi Yochanan holds, Rabbi Yochanan is like Rabbi Yochanan holds of roin, and therefore even though the wine fell in later, it doesn't matter. The wine will not join forces. You keep the treif of wine halachically isolated from the rest of the wine, and therefore the water could be mavad. Frank the Gemara, when we isolate Rabbi Yochanan Ryan, you're naming it on as a pashut that Rabbi Yochanan knows for sure. He paskined with clarity. We always say Ryan. So if you have min b'minai and b'she'ena minai, you make believe like the minai is not there at all, and then you just take the heter of she'ena minai, which is the water, and the yayin nesach, and you let them fight with each other. And if there's enough water to be mevatel the yayin nesach, it will be mutter. Are you sure that Rabbi Yochanan said that unequivocally? I'm going to show you that Rabbi Yochanan wasn't so sure, because Vaboy minei Ravasi me Rabbi Yochanan. Ravasi had a shaila for Rabbi Yochanan. You know, by Sheva brachas, the guy who benches has one becher, and then the Sheva brachas set on a different becher, and then they take the two bechers and they mix them all together, and then they drink it together. So what happens if one of those bechers was chulin, and one of those bechers was truma, and the wine was strong? So both these koshes, the kosh of truma wine and the kosh of chulin wine, were diluted heavily with water, and then they were all mixed together. So now you have the water that was added to both bechers, plus you have the wine of truma and the wine of chulin. It's all fermented. And they wanted to know: do we have to treat this wine water mixture like truma, or can we treat it like chulin? So they asked Rabbi Yochanan what to do. Now this is exactly the shayla. If you hold royan, that means you make believe that the chulin wine isn't there, and all you have is the water and the truma wine, and it would be mevatlet. But if you look at it like both wines are there, there's not enough water to be mevatel the chulin and the truma wine combined. But there is enough water to be mevatel just the truma wine. So this is exactly the shaila of whether or not you say roin. And you know what? V'loy pashutlay. Rabbi Yochanan didn't have the answer. But if you're so sure that Rabbi Yochanan was so sure that you say roin, he should have paskined over there that it was mutter and that we treat it like chulin. Zok to Gemara, meikar loy pashutlay. When Rabbi Yochanan was first presented with the shaila, he wasn't sure. He had to ponder it. But after he thought it through and he worked it through, libisay pashutlay. And they'll prove it to you, because the next time they asked him this shaila by Sheva brachas, he answered on the spot without any hesitation. It barnami Amar Abami Amar Rabbi Yochanan Varmilo Amar Abasi Rabbi Yochanan Beis Kaisos Echad Shel Chulun Vechad Shel Truma Umazgan, and they were both diluted with water. And then the Irvin Zebazah, the Chulun and the Truma got mixed together. Roin is a heter kilo ena. You look as if there's no Chulun wine here. Bashar and the Truma wine Mayim Rabim and Alavim Mabatel. The water is Mabatel the Truma, and therefore this whole mixture is considered Chulun. So you see, at the end of the day, Rabbi Yochanan came to the conclusion that you do say Roin. So we learned a lot of different things today. We learned the machlokes whether or not you say royan. We learned a shaila: if do you say royan only if the water came first, or even if the water came second, right? And then we even had the shita of Rav Dima, who was so mekel, who says kama bottle. Beautiful. Zog the heilige Gemara weiter. The Mishnah tells us what is the halacha by yayin nesach, that min b'min asur b'mashahu. Min b'sheinima is b'noisen tam. After the Mishnah tells us this halacha, the Mishnah goes on and says zeh klal. This applies everywhere. Min b'mina b'mashu, shaloi b'mina b'noisen tam. Now zeh klal obviously is not to teach us about yayin nesach. That the Mishnah said beferish. So zeh klal must be teaching us that there's other halachas that this same rule applied to. So Rabbi Shmuel Amar Tavayu, it applies to everything. Kol isurin shebetayra. Yayin nesach is not unique. Every yisur in the Torah, b'minon b'mashahu, shaloi b'minon b'noisen tam. And that's what Zaklal is. Zaklal in our Mishnah is lasuye mai, lasuye kol isurin shebetayra, all isurin shebetayra, min b'minoi is osher b'mashahu, and min b'shein minoi is b'noisen tam. That is the shita of Rav and Shmuel. But Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish Amar Tavayu, that Kol Yisurin Shabbataya, Bein B'mina and Bein Shaloi B'mina is B'nois and Tam. So by all other Isurim, we don't have that Chumrah, that Min B'mina is B'mashu. Except Chutz Mi Tevel V'Yayin Nesach. Yayin Nesach, our Mishnah says, but Tevel has the same halacha, and we're going to need to know why is it that Tevel Min B'minoi is B'mashu. Why is that? And we're going to see soon. So Zok to Gemara, Chutz Mi Tevel V'Yayin Nesach, B'mina B'mashu, V'Shaloi B'mina B'nois and Tam. So what is Zaklal in our Mishnah coming to add over and above Yain Nesach? Tevel. It's just adding Tevel. Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Shmuel. We have Tanoim who hold like Rav and Shmuel, and Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlokish. And we have Brishas that seem to say like Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokish. In other words, this Machloikas Amaroim is actually a Machloikas Tanoim. Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Shmuel. Call these Surin Shabbatayr B'minim B'mashu Shalai B'minim B'nois and Dam. That's what Rav and Shmuel said. Tanya Kavasei de Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlokish that Kol Yisurin Shabbatayr Bein B'mina and Bein Shalai B'minim is B'nois and Tam. Chutz mitevel v'yayin nesach. That's b'minon b'mashu, and shaloi b'ninon is b'nois and tam. So frankly, more bishlam yayin nesach, I understand why they were so makbid that even a mashu asers. We're talking about avodah zara. We're playing with fire, so they asered min b'mina even with a mashu. Ela tevel my taima. Tevel is any other iser. Why would tevel be more chomer than any other iser? That tevel min b'mina is b'mashu. Zok to Gemara, you know why? Because ket teira. How are you mater tevel? How are you mafer shuma? Midaraisa chita achas pateres is a kri. One little wheat kernel can be matir all of a huge warehouse full of tevel. If you make one little kernel into truma, boom, it's matir everything. So we say keteroi kachin surai. The same way you could be matir tevel with one mashu, so too it will aster with one mashu. Now we know midurabanon. They said you surely shouldn't give one little kernel. If you're an average guy, it should give you 2%, 1 out of 50. If you're a Compton, it should be 1 out of 60, a little bit less than 2%. And if you're a Breita person, you want to give more, it should be 1 out of 40, which is a little bit more than 2%. The Omar Shmuel told us that midaraisa chita achas paiteres as a kri. One little kernel can pater, but that means if you're being mavrish wheat on wheat or barley on barley. So therefore, utananami, we had a mishnah that taught us, but me omru tevel oiser b'kolshu. Where does tevel aser b'kolshu? That's dafka b'minoi, but shaloi b'minoi is b'nois and tam, just like heteroi. Heteroi, you could only be mafresh chita on a chita, not chita on a soira, and therefore the only time you say that min b'minoi is also b'mashu is only if it's min b'minoi, not if it's min b'sheinin. Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish daf Ayin Gimel, Misham tomorrow is Ayin Dalid, and Tuesday Daf Ayin Hey, and on Tuesday Be'ez Hashem we're going to finish the Masechta. Everybody should have a git gebench to vach.
Yitvach Rabbi Yasmin.
It's vach.